Mr. Ramesh Damani in our studios. And Mr. Damani, great having you. Thanks for joining in. It almost seems as if the world hopes that they were also allowed to vote in the election because everybody has an opinion there.
Yeah. Thank you, Neeraj. Thank you for first inviting me for your show. And Samina. See, this is the most important election in the history of the world because it's for the leader of the free world. The guy who wins the presidency has the nuclear codes, the keys to Air Force One. Every public statement he makes is scrutinized by the press almost incessantly. Whereas the loser, Hillary Clinton, the next day after she lost, went for a hike. Mitt Romney, who lost to Obama, was pumping gas the next day. So almost nothing. You become almost asterisk. So it is a very important election. It's one of the direct elections. And it's a quadrennial spectacle, and I, for one, am very enthused by it.
What are you watching for the most? I mean, it's obviously a neck-to-neck, and the polls out there are very debatable and very varied, if you will. But how have you gauged the thing thus far?
Well, what it seems to me is that it is neck-to-neck. But as I mentioned before, this is an Electoral College business. So it's a 50 state-by-state transaction that goes on. Now, I think 226 to 219 votes already cast, we know where they're going to get. So there's a balance of 60, 70 electoral votes that matter. And they're the blue wall, the so-called blue wall, which is Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania. And of course, in the South, the Sun Belt states of Georgia, North Carolina, Arizona, Nevada. Those are the important states to watch. For Kamala to win, she would almost have to carry the blue wall states, all three of them. For Trump to win, if he carries the 4 Sunbelt states, it would bring him over the top if he gets one more of the blue wall states. So the 2 states that could pose surprises to us is Iowa and New Hampshire. A recent poll released in Iowa shows that Kamala is ahead in Iowa, which is very rare for a Democrat to lead in Iowa. So that would be watched very closely. And New Hampshire, which is typically a Democratic state, is leaning Republican this time. So they could sweep there. But clearly the road to 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, or the White House, leads to the state of Pennsylvania.
Yeah. Mr. Damani, first of all, we're so excited to have you here on NDTV Profit.
Thank you.
And your passion for US elections and tracking it is truly amazing. I think you'll also help us make sense of this from India Inc.'s perspective. Indian equity markets, global markets. Why is everyone rooting for Trump?
Well, I think you did a great job explaining some of the factors that Kamala and Donald Trump stand for out there. I think the rooting for Trump is perhaps, in my opinion, a bit misplaced because he has a very inward and unsecular view of America's role. Just remember, after World War II, it was on America's broad shoulders that the world prospered. Japan and Germany, 2 economic powerhouses, members of the G5, came back because of the Marshall Plan and the largest of America, opening up their wallets after beating them decisively in World War II. Now, Trump wants to cut down immigration, increase tariffs, make America a secular power. So I'm not sure why they want him. The one reason suggested is that taxes will go down in America, corporate tax will go down, individual tax will go down, replaced by tariffs. But tariffs are paid by the American consumer.
So inflationary. It's inflationary.
And of course it's inflationary. And the second part is immigration. America is a land of immigrants. A lot of the CEOs, as we know, are Indians running the companies. A lot of people in very important positions are immigrants because it was truly a merit-based society. And for them to remove the essential characteristic of that would be damaging. So there's not a good choice between the 2 candidates, Kamala and Donald, at this time, as most people have said. But on balance, I would prefer Kamala because America can recover from a bad Democratic administration, but it can't recover from the dark and foreboding statements that Trump has made, including in his 2016 inauguration speech. I mean, that is a classic of black darkness. So I'm in the minority opinion. I think that the markets and the world economy would ultimately find Kamala Harris's victory a bit more palatable than Donald Trump's.
So Damani, good point, right? Because the true test or DNA of America is that it's equal to all. And I think Trump is out to change that. But the world at this stage is seeking change from what we understand. We've talked about, and you told us what you think about what this means for the country, what it means for Americans, and what it means for the world at large. But who is better for the markets? Who is better for equity markets? I know data shows that after the short-term volatility, it's back to business. Who do you think is going to be better for markets and the corporate sector at large?
Yeah, 2 points. If you look at the historical record, the two best administrations for the stock market has been Bill Clinton and Barack Obama. In Bill Clinton, the Dow and the S&P rose about 200% during his 8-year term, about 180, 190% in Obama. After that was George Bush. So the historical record is that, as Warren Buffett famously said, that you don't sell America short. America will do well irrespective of who's in power, which is what has been. I think on average, the Dow has gained 8 to 10% over the last 40, 50 years. So I think historical records suggest that it does well with Democratic and Republican administration. Between Joe Biden's 4 years and Donald Trump's 4 years, it's Tweedledum, Tweedledee. There's not been any great difference in Dow performance. So I'm confident that the market will do well because there's a system of checks and balances, Samina, within the American government. It's not that the American president has a moral bully pulpit. He can influence. But ultimately, Congress has the purse strings. It has to pass the budgets. Senate must confirm his appointments. So there's a great system of checks and balances that have worked well in America. I think it will continue to work in America unless Donald Trump is elected. And you've heard of the movie The Last Emperor? Well, he would be the first emperor of America because after having been indicted 3 times, criminally prosecuted, impeached, if he comes back, he'll be almost an unchecked power in America. And I think he would, rule by writ almost, which is so rare in America. But I don't think people would argue against him, given the fact that he, despite all the opposition, has still won. So I think Trump coming would mean more autocracy for America, though the Trump supporters would disbelieve that. I believe that might be true.
But why is that? Why do you think this is a change in so many ways? What is leading to this?
See, Trump has a base of support, which is so loyal to him. In fact, if you remember the 2016 election campaign, Trump actually made a statement which I thought was the most stupid statement a president could make. He said, I could go down Fifth Avenue and shoot people and would not change my vote. And as ridiculous as that sounds, that was true. His base is still fully supporting him. No matter what he says, what he does, who he picks, no matter what policy he does, they are with him. So I think there's one part of this election is there's a gender divide in America. If only women were voting in America, I think Kamala would win by a landslide, as you said. But because men are voting, it's a much closer election than he will. And there's a lot of rural America that is dissatisfied with globalization, with the progressive elites, what they are doing to them, stuffing the country with immigration, the tax rates, the tech billionaires, so-called. So I think that is giving him his power base. And that is such a solid base that no matter what he does, he's going to, it's a 50-50 nation, but 45-46 is almost set in stone. It's not going to change. So they're fighting only for the 3-4%.
This is important. And, more questions to you, Mr. Damani, but just a quick detour because our colleague Gauri Dwivedi is joining us live right now from Washington. And Gauri, give us an overview. What's the final leg of the campaigning like and who will lead the Oval Office according to people out there?
It's so tough to say, Dheeraj, and I've been hearing what Mr. Damani has been saying, all very erudite insights, and in fact, most of them are absolutely correct. I am standing, behind me is the White House, and it's absolutely impossible to say which one of those two candidates is really going to make it in the next 24 hours. But what I can say, the last couple of days, I've been here almost a week now, 3 specific cases I will point out. That just tells you exactly how tight this race is. A bunch of black Americans we spoke to in Philadelphia, which is 43% blacks. In fact, all black males I spoke to, this is a very unscientific an unscientific poll, but just important for our viewers to know. Every black American male that I spoke to said that they will vote for Trump because they feel Kamala Harris's economic plan they don't agree with. They said they don't even know what that is. The reason why you have Obama and so many other people, in fact, speaking and reaching directly to the black male demographic. That's the reason. Secondly, I spoke with Steny Hoyer, who is the former number 2 in the Democrat camp, as late as till last year, next only to Nancy Pelosi. And he conceded to me in an interview saying that the Democrat campaign could have focused more on economic aspects of Kamala Harris's campaign and Kamala Harris's policies. And he also conceded that Trump did a better job of being able to say that he can fix it better. It all comes down to optics. And the third final point I will say is I spoke to a lot of young girls in New York City. And the one thing I asked all of them is that will you vote for Kamala Harris because it comes down to reproductive rights? They said it's not just about abortion that I'm going to vote on. It's going to be a bunch of things. And why should I only vote for a woman who's on the ticket? It's not just about a woman. It's much more than that. So these instances, as I said, unscientific polling, nowhere compared to the kind of 100 scientific polls that have been done only for Pennsylvania, but they just indicate to you how fractured the political landscape right now is. Family votes have actually been divided till the very last, and there's no way of knowing right now, 12 hours before the voting, that who will really be the next occupant of Oval House.
You have your hands full. I wonder if you will get to sleep tonight, but be that as it may, thank you for keeping us updated and all the best for the coverage. You know, we take forth some of the points that Gauri mentioned, Mr. Damani, to you as well, but also try and now overlay this with a perspective of what it means for, let's say, India, right? Because we are kind of thinking about that. So a lot of popular opinion by endorsements for each of the separate participants. How do you think, though, policies could shape up in either of the victories? The Fed move might also get impacted. Some people say because of who comes into the White House. What's your sense?
My sense is the Fed remains a very important construct of U.S. economic policy. John Kenneth Galbraith, who was U.S. ambassador to India in the 60s, used to say that the finance minister of every emerging market should have his residence in Washington rather than the state capital, because what happens is more important in terms of the money flows than what they can do in the state capitals. I don't think that much has changed. The U.S. is still the pillar on which the U.S. economy rests completely. But for 40, 50 years in the post-World War II Bretton Woods type agreement, we built a world economy on access to U.S. markets. China rose to power by having access to U.S. markets. India, remember, in the 60s had a lot of benefit from PL 480, despite disagreeing and being non-aligned. The US opened its floodgates to India under PL 480 and economic aid, and Indian people went there. All that might change. So that would not, in my opinion, that can't be good for the global economy. The global economy still needs a global power like the US to open its wallet. There isn't a company like China or Russia or Germany that can replace it. So I think any precedent that would prefer an open economy, prefer trade, prefer mutual agreement rather than, say, unilaterally pulling out of the Taiwan agreement or NATO should be preferred. So I'm not sure what a second-term presidency brings, but I'm very apprehensive about it because, as I told you in the previous segment, that he is going to be the first emperor of America. He's not going to be a president, but an emperor, because if he wins this time, I mean, he'll be an absolute power to himself. He can pretty much run his writ through Congress, run his writ through the presidency, and he's not up for re-election. So he would be even more imaginative. At least the first term, the prospect of election kept him in check. The second term, he can't run again, so it will not keep him in check.
You know, I just want to get your take on this perception that's building, and in part because under Biden's watch, two major global conflagrations began and now continue, and these wars are still raging, one of course in the Middle East and one between Ukraine and Russia. And this perhaps a fantasy that Trump comes in and puts an end to all of this because Biden just could not, and of course Kamala won't be able to. I think that's part of the allure of Trump right now, that he's a strong man that can fix what's happening in the world, where the US has lost that kind of a position. Any merit to it at all, or is it just a fantasy?
It's hard to say what starts the conflagration. I mean, in Israel, Netanyahu is beholden to Trump, so he might listen to Trump more than he listen to Biden.
Yeah.
And the Ukraine stuff has gone a bit beyond. If you unilaterally stop Ukraine from fighting Russia, for example, by telling them we won't supply you arms or money out there, what is to prevent China tomorrow from launching an invasion against Taiwan, in which the president has said, I will not support Taiwan, or I will not support a NATO member, or I'll pull out of NATO, or if they don't pay them money, it's like America is wanting hafta. I will protect you as long as you pay me your defense budget of 2%. If you don't, we won't. That is not America that I know of. America had moral leadership in the world, and there were causes more important than economics, and they would support truth, liberty, democracy for almost post-World War II era. So I would be very puzzled to see, I think Trump would not do that because he's so insular. The politics swings in cycles. I think in the 1920s, America was very insular, then became a global power. And I think they're trying to go back to be insular, but I don't think it'll work.
So Damani, we've talked about the geopolitical dynamics, but what I also want to talk to you about is what happens to the Federal Reserve. And this is important because in a few days from now, you also have that much look forward to meeting. And it's not just like the US tracks this, right? Every central bank decision, for some reason, is driven by what the Fed does.
Of course.
And from what we expect, Trump's potential influence on the Federal Reserve rate decision exists. How concerned should India as a country be about market volatility and inflation? Because if Harris was in control, she would not interfere, and the trajectory would be far more predictable. Would you agree?
Yeah, I'd agree with you. I think Trump is, has no filter in his mouth. I mean, he'll speak out against the Federal Reserve Governor, which no US president speaks out against. Even if Ronald Reagan or Paul Volcker didn't reduce rates, he'd say disappointed. But that's about the extent of the statement. Trump will fire the guy.
He's the emperor, remember?
Yeah, he's the emperor, as I told you. So, yes, I would be worried about it. But having said that, I mean, at least in the short term, Trump and most people prefer lower rates rather than higher rates. Now, the one consequence that both the presidents, whoever is elected, would have to deal with is the burgeoning US debt. It is almost getting out of hand. At some point, the bond market vigilantes will hold the government, will hold them to account and say you can't keep increasing the debt, and you will have to make hard decisions to do that.
And how soon will that show up, in your opinion?
I think in the short run, it won't show up because I think the markets discounted a very close election. In the long run, it has a huge impact. I mean, for example, Trump, one of the policies Trump is saying is that if you make tips, you're not going to be taxed. If you make Social Security, you're not going to be taxed. If you make state taxes, you can deduct that. I mean, where's the money going to come from without increasing the budget?
But
and how
both want to spend. Both want to spend money they don't have.
In fact,
but Trump more so, believe it or not. Trump more so.
Really, Kamala wants to subsidize childcare. She wants to subsidize home loans.
yeah, the overall numbers seem higher when it came to Kamala Harris spending. Mr.
No,
Damani.
no, it is Trump's actually spending. I mean, imagine if you weren't saying, if you don't tax tips in America, America becomes a service economy. Everyone will go on the tips model. So it's not going to work. Again, like I said, America has checks and balances. The executive and the legislative is different. So they will not be able to necessarily pass it through Congress that easily.
I have one last question. Since you are overwhelmingly saying that you prefer a Kamala Harris presidency, let's assume the reverse happens and Donald Trump comes to power. What are the positives out there? There are a lot of issues out there. What are the positives of that presidency? From an Indian watcher's perspective, let's say.
I think he's a businessman, so he understands business. Who is supporting him? Elon Musk is supporting him. Bill Ackman, a fund manager, is supporting him. A lot of business people support him. They feel that he would be better for business. I just happen to have a different opinion about it, so I'm not really in that same supportive camp. But he would clearly cut tax rates, so that might be good for us. And generally what happens is when the US cut its corporate tax rate, we followed a few years later in India by cutting our corporate tax rate. That led to a huge bull market in India. So, it maybe does that, but it's a tough one.
Just one quick one. Trump's pro-oil stance could also lead to increased US oil production. How will this impact global crude prices? Because this is a very important moving part when it comes to our import bill and India's initiatives on renewable energy, which is the big theme for the next 5 years.
It's a mixed bag. Of course, it's good if oil prices go down for India. It's a large part of our Indian economic basket. But I think the world is now transiting to electric energy, and the fact that Elon Musk has supported him, and what Trump has said that he'd make Elon the head of the efficiency in the government in America. And if he does that, I think we'll move faster to an electric transition in America, or a non-fossil fuels based transition in America. Though, Trump is all over the place on this because he wants to win in Pennsylvania. He's for fossil fuel because he wants Elon Musk's vote. He's for the transition to non-combustive energy. So he's been all over the place on this.
We have to talk to you about what's happening in the Indian markets right now. We're coming off a terrible October. The first trading session of November has been painful, to say the least. I mean, it's being blamed on the US election uncertainty and the Fed. But is there a deeper problem here, you see?
I think the market was running a marathon and it's just tired. It's just a bit tired. The results haven't been good. The troubles at the bottom of the pyramid in the Indian economy. I think it just needs time. I think it'll probably pass through a dull last quarter of this financial year. And then next quarter we'll start looking again to a more upbeat assessment. I think the market is falling of its own weight rather than blaming the US or blaming other reasons for it.
Just a quick one, Mr. Damani. This is more specific in terms of actionables. You've expressed optimism about PSUs in the past. this space of the market has, just like the rest of the market, has seen a big, big correction. Do you feel PSU OMCs, for example, look even more attractive? Or any sort of basket in the market right now that looks like a good allocation, a good sector that could be allocated to? With fresh
Samina,
capital.
I'll first make a motherhood statement. When I joined the market in the mid-80s sometime, the index Sensex was below 800. Today it's 80,000. It's up 100x.
Everything's expensive.
Not very expensive, but it pays to be invested in India. I think these corrections and volatility are a part of our business, and they will happen from time to time. There's no reason to panic and get out of the Indian markets because it's going to go down 10%. So what? You just have to ride it out. It's not like a game of cards where you have a bad pack and you hold on and pack up and try and find a new pack of cards to do it. The way to make money is to remain invested in high quality businesses and ride out the volatility. The risk of permanent loss of capital in a great business is much smaller than the risk of loss in terms of panicking due to volatility. Having said that, I think the PSU basket itself had gone up 20x, 15x. So they're correcting. There's nothing more to it than that. That's, all good stocks correct over long periods of time, give a new opportunity for new investors to come into the market. In terms of the new sectors that I particularly happen to like, I've mentioned to you on the Diwali show, I like the place of the public digital infrastructure space. We're making a digital India in terms of KYC, Aadhaar, biometrics, and those people who build that infrastructure, I think have long years of growth ahead of them. So that's one sector. And what I find surprising for me, because I've never been a big believer in the pharma sector as such, and other than the outstanding companies in the large cap, which are like DVs and Dr. Reddy's, they're doing fine. A number of small cap and mid cap companies in India are now coming out with intellectual property, developing their own drugs. It could be anti-obesity, it could be Botox, it could be breast cancer, it could be in so many other antibiotics, for example. So I would suggest you look at them, because the intellectual property is not yet being valued. I think they're still being valued as generics or contract drug manufacturers. But the fact that they have intellectual property means these companies will over time re-rate.
So would you do a lump sum investment in these ideas, or would you stagger your buying, given that there could be uncertainty on the horizon?
There's never a clear answer, but I generally tell the staggering kind. I tend to buy over a period of time.
Okay.
Thank you so much, Mr. Damani, for joining us today.
Always a pleasure. It's fun to be here.
Are we seeing you back tomorrow? Results, I think, clear by tomorrow, or maybe more if it's a close fight?
The last time it took almost 4 days before the election was called. I think the processes have improved, so it may be called. But whatever happens, if Trump loses, it is going to be litigated. I guarantee you that. On Trump's tombstones, he says, "I won." So he's not going to accept a defeat, no matter what happens to you. So if he loses, I think there'll be a long period of court cases going on. If he wins, then of course it'll be done in a few days.
So we will have Mr. Damani hopefully back and talking to us when the numbers are clear, the results are clear, to talk about what next and what it means. But thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Tamanna. Thank you, Samina.
We promise you
Great.
very good green tea. we are connected.
As long as the screen is green, I'm okay.
Okay, good. And I think we might just have today a little
That's
bit of
the
it.
dialogue of the day.
Thank you, Mr. Damani. Great
Thanks,
talking to you.
Neeraj.